the RMT's position change perhaps after the Transport Salaried Staff Association, another rail union, accepted Network Rail's 9 to 11% consolidated pay increase over the next fortnight? We'll hear from them in the moment. But let's talk now to Chris Loder, Conservative MP for West Dorset, a member of the Commons Transport Select Committee, formerly a member of the RMT himself. He worked on the railways from the age of 18, starting out as a rail guard. Chris Loder, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Cathy.
Were you reassured by Mick Lynch there? A sort of tinge of optimism, wasn't there?
Well, tinge of optimism, you could say, but the reality is that he's got a threat of mutiny on his hands from his own members who believe that, 8 days strike over a period of a cost of living crisis and the run up to Christmas, they believe that's been totally unfair on them. It's really pushed many of them into a position of real poverty because it's costing them thousands of pounds. That is not sustainable. And
Where's your evidence for that, though? I mean, you're sort of speculating, aren't you? Maybe the case,
no,
but
I'm
we
not.
don't
No,
know,
no, no,
do
no.
we?
Or I don't know, Cathy. If you go and talk to people in the railway, I used to work for the railway for 20 years, and I travel on it quite often, and I go around the country. I talk directly to RMT members about this, and that is very clear to me that that is their feedback,
They're
that
telling you
they've
they're
had
fed
enough.
up.
Yep, they're fed up. They're fed up to the back teeth of being used as political pawns by the RMT union. And it's, this is a situation. I mean, you said, this shows optimism, doesn't it, from Mick Lynch? Well, I suppose in many ways it does show optimism, but it really, if you look behind the scenes, Mick Lynch is under intense pressure now, probably the most intense pressure that he's faced in his period of office. And that is because the membership will basically threaten a mutiny if he does not get this strike over and done with.
Well, if you're right, then are
Yeah.
we looking at the prospect of these strikes ending in the next few days? Which, yes, like you, I do travel on the railways a lot, and I'd be pleased to hear that, as I'm sure you would.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I hope these strikes come to an end. I think they've gone on for an unnecessary long time.
But do you really
But
believe they will? Is what I'm trying to ask.
um, I hope. I mean, I'm not close to the detail of the negotiations, so I don't know. But I hope they will. I mean, I do think though that the General Secretary himself finds himself in a very difficult position because he's got a hard left element of his union that are very keen to fall in line with the TUC and the other unions, other big unions, to have a coordinated strike action on one hand, and then he's got his own members on the other hand that have had enough, that have been very vocal about saying they've had enough, and if they don't find a conclusion soon, they themselves will break the strike. So,
Right.
he's in a hard position.
Okay, but you think the
And
government's right not to budge then?
yeah, I do think the government's right not to budge because they're going to smoke him out.
Right.
The reality is that the General Secretary is between a rock and a hard place. He's been in that position for quite some time, and I'm afraid the rock and the hard place are now pushing closer together,
Right.
and he's starting to feel the squeeze. The only way out for him is to get a deal, but I suspect if he does come to a deal, and I hope there's a deal made, I suspect there will be consequences for him with those on the left of
Okay.
his union in the not too distant
Well,
future.
let's see if you're right. But more broadly, there does seem to be waning public support. There's some evidence of that on the rail strikes. But when it comes to the nurses, I spoke to nurses on the picket line up in Leeds earlier this week, and there was a lot of public support for them, and the polls do suggest that's remaining pretty firm.
Well,
Some of your colleagues are saying the government needs to improve its pay offer. What's your view on that?
Well, I represent West Dorset, and I'm pleased to say that the nurses in Dorset, particularly at Dorset County Hospital and around the county, are not on strike. So, from my perspective as a constituency MP, it's really important that everybody, all your listeners, note that not all of the nurses in the country are on strike.
Sure.
Only a proportion of them are, and I think it's totally wrong of the chief nurse, who is in effect the senior manager of nurses, to be on the picket line.
Okay, but that's not the question I asked, though, with respect, Chris. I asked if you thought the government should improve its 4.3% pay offer.
With respect to me, in West Dorset, the nurses who live and work in my constituency have voted not to go for strike action.
They're Unite
and I've
members, are
got
they? Not RCN?
well, that there are a number of unions that are represented in Dorset, but there is no strike action taking place.
Okay, but
No, they they
nevertheless,
they, they believe no, there's no nevertheless about it. My constituents and those who work in the hospitals believe that they have a fair offer. I think there's a question to go back to the RCN and others to say, well, if you have some that believe this is fair, why do you not? And when I
okay,
look
but
at the
that is an answer
photos,
to a different question. So,
no, 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 it's not.
nevertheless, I'm going to
Because
get this question in and ask you to
if I
answer this
look
question, please, Chris.
if I look at the photographs in the newspapers on the picket lines, what
Yeah.
I see is Socialist Worker Party placards.
Oh, really?
That
So you
tells
think
me
the
all I need to
union's
know.
been infiltrated, has it?
Well, I mean, it's quite common knowledge, isn't it, that the TUC only 6 weeks ago, the TUC paid for members of the shadow cabinet to go to Spain to meet Spanish unions who already have legislation about minimum service levels um, effective in that country, to basically learn from them to get hints and tips
Yeah,
about
but
how to maximise disruption here, and
that's
that was
quite something
across
else
the
from the
board.
claim you were making that the Socialist Workers' Party was somehow behind this RCN strike. So I just ask again,
Well,
and I do
well,
want to get an
no.
answer. Please,
That's not
Chris,
what I
I've
said.
asked this
That's
question
not what I
three
said.
times.
That's
Okay,
not
but
what I
I've
said.
asked this
What I
question
said
three
is
times
that the
now, Chris.
Socialist Workers' Party are all over the papers with their placards
Right.
at these picket lines. So
Okay.
there is clearly some sort of link there. Because if it was an RCN strike purely, why are the Socialist Worker Party placards
Well, I'm
there?
I'm
That,
sure
that
they'd
that's a
say they
question
were
to be
showing
asked
their
by them.
support, and I will ask the RCN that. But I want to ask you
Yeah, yeah.
this question again: should the government improve its 4.3% pay offer, as some of
And
your colleagues say they should?
And I've said to you in my constituency in Dorset,
You know, I
the people
understand.
who live, yeah, but I'm a constituency MP, I'm not a minister.
Yeah, but
I'm a
I'm just
constituency
saying, is
MP
4.3%
representing,
a decent
I,
offer?
I represent those people who live in my constituency and who work here. They believe that the offer they have received is fair. No one in my own constituency has written to me to tell me that they don't believe it's fair.
Really, that's
And therefore,
astonishing. Even the Express
well,
has a
well,
splash today saying
well,
just up the
good on
pay
them.
offer. So,
Good on
so
them. But I don't think they've asked. I don't think they've asked the nurses that work in my constituency and probably a lot of the other constituencies where they're not on strike.
right, to pin you down completely, then you think the
Come on
government's
then.
4.3% for nurses, that's fair enough.
I'm saying in Dorset that
I
appears to
know
be
what you've
fair
said about
enough.
Dorset. Okay, in
No,
Dorset
but
and the rest of the
I'm a
country.
represent. No,
Right.
but I'm the constituency MP for West Dorset. I represent those people there, and no one is telling me it's not fair. So therefore, unless someone's going to tell me actually they believe it's unfair and tell me why, I'm inclined to support their
Well, okay,
decision.
seeing as you want to bring this discussion back to Dorset, there are nurses
Okay.
on strike in Dorset. Members of the RCN are on strike in Dorset.
Well, not at Dorset County Hospital.
Well, they're in
If you
Dorset.
just go on Twitter and look at the Dorset County Hospital Twitter feed,
But
and you'll see
I'm talking
that
about
there is no
Dorset.
strike happening.
You want to
Well,
narrow
I'm
this
talking
down
about
to your constituency.
so
Let's narrow
I,
it down to Dorset as a whole. And there are members of the RCN, nurses, on strike in that constituency. So clearly, if you want to
well,
talk
I'm
about your
sorry. I'm
constituency,
afraid you would have to provide
4.3%
me.
isn't good enough for them.
You would have to provide me with the facts to back up that claim
Well,
because
Lucy Walton,
I
a
I
member of the
I
RCN, is on strike in Dorset. Perhaps
well,
she'd
I'm
like to.
afraid.
Perhaps she'd like
Well,
to
well, maybe
come
she
on the
should get in
show
touch and let me
and
know. But if you,
yeah.
as I'm saying to you, if you look at the information available, go on Twitter, go on Facebook, and look at the feeds from the hospitals, you will see very clearly that there is not a strike taking place. And it's actually making sure people know that because they don't want patients not to come forward thinking that services are not being offered.
Yeah, but
And I think
maybe
we've got to, it's really
Dorset County.
important.
I'm sure there's more than one hospital in Dorset.
Well,
Um,
Cathy, I think you do well to come down and visit us in rural Dorset to see
yeah,
some of
I'd
the
love
pressures
to.
that we have
I come
because
down that
we
way
we ha-
very often.
well, let me know. Give me a ring. Let me
Listen.
know, and I'll show you around.
I'm sorry, but Lucy Walton, who I just quoted, who is a member of the RCN, is a clinical practitioner at Dorset County Hospital. So she's on strike.
Well, she might be an individual who's on strike, but there is not a collective strike action.
Okay.
And,
Well,
and
I
if
would like
that's
to
her, and if
invite
that's her
anyone
individual
listening
choice,
in Dorset. Sorry.
there are thousands of people that work at Dorset County Hospital.
Right.
If one person chooses to strike, that's her individual right. Of course it is.
Okay, I'm
But
sure it's
there is
more than
no.
one person because actually someone has just texted in. Jenny in Dorset, who's a retired civil servant, not Socialist Workers' Party, she makes the point. She says, this morning, I supported RMT strikers on a picket line in Dorset. None of them were complaining that Mick Lynch was treating them unfairly. Far from it. They were fully supporting him. Chris
Well,
Loder has
that's
absolutely got it wrong.
So that's wonderful. So I'm assuming that would be either at Weymouth or Bournemouth, because that's the two places where there are pickets in Dorset. It's probably worth noting, let's take Bournemouth for an example, if that is indeed where Jenny's talking about. When I looked at the last photos of the picket line there last week, you're talking about maybe 10, maybe 12 people on a picket line. I don't know if you know how many hundreds of people are employed at that station,
Mhm.
but those 12 or so people who are on the picket line are absolutely not reflective of the hundreds of people that work there.
Right, and in fairness, I should point out, Chris from Sheffield has just texted in, NHS, let's root out the soft jobs, managers hiding away in the offices, employing their relatives, screwing the shift system, screwing the overtime system, screwing the expenses system, screwing the taxpayer. It's all going on. I agree that socialist workers have influenced this action. Chris Loader, thank you very much for coming
It's
on
been
the
really good
show.
to speak to you, Cathy. Hope we can speak again soon.